All right, should be recording now. So today we have Derek Lambert of MythVision podcast joining us. So to start out, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your content?
33 years old. I'll be crucified sometime this year. I'm not really sure. I'll predict the day when the time comes near so you guys can get ready. So when I return, you know that I'm the one. MythVision podcast is what I do. It's really trying to educate people to see the humanity behind these texts. We all thought they were divine when we were believers, and they're not. So I want to point out, I want to educate people because there's so much ignorance as well as harmful stuff. Like recently, there was a guy who claimed God spoke to him and he murdered his children. Woman years ago did this, drowned her kids. Now that's extreme. Of course, I am not painting the whole picture of Christendom with that. That is ridiculous for me to say that. I'm saying I know what it's like to say I heard the voice of God in my own head. That's how obsessive I was about it. Was that me talking or was that God talking? But we say it was God. So I want to educate people on the Bible, on religion, on myths, on history, on cults, and delve deep into these things so that more people can wake up and realize, you know, I don't need that to have a happy, loving, good life and to love people and to care about people. You don't have to have a book that tells you these things. And yeah, I go deep. I go deep into all that stuff.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, like we were talking about before this, you know, if people don't already know, you interview like top-notch scholars. You got Bart Ehrman on, Joel Baden, and many others. So, but yeah, like what's it like to I mean, I've interviewed some too, but you're consistently hitting that mark. So what's it like to be able to do that?
Oh man, it's heaven. I don't forget an afterlife, I'm good. No, I love learning from these people because one thing you'll know is you'll see where they overlap and they agree. And then you see where they differ and why. All that tells me is the text isn't that clear. And when the text isn't that clear, why the hell are you so confident that this is God's word and it's accurate? Dude, no wonder there's so many denominations. So I love making these relationships with people I never thought I would have. I didn't like half the people I'm interviewing as a Christian. I didn't want to hear what they had to say. I only listened to the William Lane Craigs, the Ravi Zacharias, and the Christian side of things. I was big into apologetics back in the day. I went to a Christian college for this. So going and actually sitting at the feet of Joel Baden, Dr. Price, being able to potentially at some point go and sit in front of Dr. Bart Ehrman, hoping to do some series on some videos with him on that. Like, it's really like, I would have looked back in the day, screw them. That's not an honor. Today, it really is an honor to say the guys I once despised have become the guys I cherish.
The guys that you used to think were suppressing the truth and unrighteousness are now the people that are you're trying to convert people to Satan, through their work.
Exactly. And before I sound like a patriarchal, I didn't mean guys as in only males, because Elaine Pagel's wonderful. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to meet Francesca Stravacapoulou. I hope I'm not butchering her name. I'm going to be interviewing her this year too, and she's a beast when it comes to scholarship and understanding. Like, there were multiple Yahwehs. There wasn't just one, and they were from different regions. What do you do when you have the same name and they're different gods from different regions with the same name? Before what we have in the Bible, before what we have in Israelite religion, or at least modern, more contemporary, down the road Israelite religion. Man, I can't tell you how fun this stuff is. It's you find out the magic trick that David Blaine's been doing on TV the whole time. Everyone else thinks it's real, and you're like, let me tell you guys the trick,
Right. So what was your let's talk a little bit about your religious background and upbringing. So what was that like as you grew up, and how did your views change, kind of evolve over time, obviously to now, but just kind of give the big picture.
Good question. Man, I've always been a heart on my sleeve kind of guy, very emotional my whole life. My mom was Pentecostal. My dad was Catholic. Mom was way more religious than dad. But mom took us to like a Baptist church as a kid and like bribed us with, we'll take you to Golden Corral, all you can eat buffet if you go to church. I didn't care for it. It was boring listening to the guy preach. It had no connection to me at all. Didn't feel anything special, nothing. I did once in a while when I went to the kids section would hear this story about a man on a boat with lots of animals. That's cool because you're a kid, right? You're like, oh, animals. But then God drowned them. And that never, like, I never understood these things. Down the road, my father was an alcoholic my whole life, like severe, very, very intense alcoholic. Plus, he's a very patriarchal alpha male. He was, you know, he's a Green Beret in the Special Forces. So it was very difficult when you had an alcoholic father and I had to leave the house all the time. He wouldn't leave when he'd get drunk. We had to leave. So not going too much into that, but there was trauma there. And so one day I'm going to a private school. I live in an area my mom didn't want me to go to certain schools. She was concerned, gangs, drugs, violence, you know, the way I might be treated. And she wanted to kind of protect me from the world around. So she took me to a private school in 6th grade. And in 6th grade, I think it was, is when they had this message about lying. And I'm giving you the nutshell of what happened the first time I had an experience. And they said, if you've lied once, you had to lie about that lie. So you've lied twice. And then they go on and on into this. Well, I went down to the little altar call because they said, these have been paid for. Jesus had died on the cross. Now I'd known about Jesus, but I had never like had an altar call experience. And I went and asked the Lord into my heart. And I said, please take over. You know, like I want this relationship with the Lord. Felt a warm, fuzzy feeling down in my solar plexus, you know, like a real close experience to something that I thought was God. Never did I know that there was chemicals in the body and the mind, and there's social, you know, pressures that kind of make you feel these exciting feelings and stuff, like you're at home, and none of that. I didn't know all that. I just knew
God just uses the chemical processes and the social dynamics. He just uses that process to make you, you know, draw closer to him. So
you are so on top of it, man. See, you know what? We should work for God again. No, but I that led me into a serious, well, I felt something, therefore what I felt must attach to what I'm being told, which is truth. So whatever I'm being told, whether it's literally factually true or not, is true because I experienced that it was true. But I never thought, well, the Indian people, the Muslims, and everyone else on planet Earth has similar things. I didn't know all that stuff till later. I knew that, but it didn't matter. My world mattered and what I thought mattered. And it's all about me and what I believe and what I was told. I went to Baptist church many years, like I said. Went to a home church that was cultic when I was a young teen. Very cultic, woman pastor. We spoke in tongues. We were King James onlyist. We did prophesying. We laid on of hands. We tried to cast out demons, the whole nine for many years. And I'd gone through like alcohol phases and tampered with pot and things like that as a kid, and was like really kind of two personalities. I'd mess around and want to see girls and do all that kind of stuff, and then go back to church and try to do the straight and narrow. Didn't know how to do both. Couldn't do both. Didn't know. And then I ended up going to Calvary Chapel. I'm skipping ahead. I've got kids now. I'm still trying to live a good life because I'm struggling with addiction on and off through these years while going in. I'm getting back on path. Calvary Chapel. God's back in my life. Boom, relapse. Oh, crap. And finally, one day I heard the pastor preach. He made a mistake quoting a Bible verse that I knew by heart because I just studied it long enough to know. When that part in John where he says, tear down this temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. And they said, we built this in 46 years. He said 40 years. And I was like, oh, no, you made a mistake. 46 in my head while he's preaching. So I came up to him after church, not to correct him or anything. That would be extremely arrogant of me. Oh, let me tell you how you were wrong. But I said, how can I learn more and do what you do? I was thinking about becoming a pastor. I wanted to take this serious. He said, go down to this college, Carolina College of Biblical Studies. It was called Carolina Bible College at the time. And I went down there and took it serious. Became a Reformed Calvinist because I was looking at the text. Got really deep into the text. Don't know how you can walk away from Romans 9 and not see that God is a tyrant in absolute control, ready to cook some or destroy some, and ready to have some for glory. It's obvious. Well, how can he find fault? Who are you, oh man, to answer back to God? God does what he wants and how he wants. So I became a Calvinist, and I went to the Presbyterian church. Never studied eschatology. I'm literally getting up to the peak of the end of what happened, and I'm skipping lots of details, but that's okay. I ended up taking eschatology seriously because I was a premill dispensationalist waiting for the damn rapture to happen with all these crazy, what is it, Tim LaHaye rapture movies. Yeah, I believe that. I had dreams about this stuff.
I read Left Behind for Kids, like this massive series. I didn't actually read the main ones. Like my grandma bought me like this huge sack of Left Behind for Kids. I think it scarred me. But yeah,
it really is scary because my wife would have dreams that said, I woke up, me and your brother got left behind, but you got taken. And the sad thing is I used to I hate to say this as a fact. I used to use my Christianity as if I was righteous and I was on the path. I was trying to tell them, get right, do the right thing. And I was so enforcing about my beliefs on them that they would have dreams that they were left because I was so righteous and I was doing God's will and I was supposedly doing this, to the point where they were like, I had a dream that God left us. Derek, you've kind of I think I psychologically made that in their head because they didn't take it as serious as me. So I'm already using it as a weapon on my own loved ones and not even realizing it. It's that manipulative. It's an addiction. I honestly believe that, by the way. I think religion taps into the same mechanisms the brain has that is being used when you're addicted to heroin, cocaine, meth. Now, it taps into different things, but it's all part of that same. When I did heroin, it felt like God hugged me and said, everything's going to be okay. That's exactly what heroin feels like. For anyone who's never done it, don't do it. I'm just telling you, that is exactly what it felt like. And that's exactly what the Holy Spirit felt like, the whole asking God in your heart. Anyway, I felt that. So I ended up challenging myself, looking at eschatology, and became an amillennialist by reading a book called A Case for Amillennialist or Amillennialism.
Who wrote that? That sounds familiar.
A woman. I can't remember her name. There's a woman who wrote that. But the reason it became influential was everything wasn't strict literal. And I was like, okay, God is the God of a cattle on 1,000 hills. Well, what if there's 1,001 hills? Is he the God of that cattle? Well, yeah, duh. It's a saying. It's not literal. It's the point is he's the God of everything. That's the point. Just a phrase.
The New Testament, the way the New Testament tries to reframe Israel in terms of the Christian church. I mean, obviously there's debates between, like you said, you developed further down that path, but at least the strength of amillennialism compared to premillennialism, can't speak, is that it does handle a lot of that stuff. I feel like the way the New Testament authors are trying to use it. You know what I mean? It's
a good point because it's so confusing. I think the New Testament isn't one message. I think there's multiple stuff going on there. Most Christians, of course, harmonize everything. And I did that. But you're right. There seems to be a replacement theology concept, at least a kernel of it, and especially some fragments of it in things like Matthew, where Israel is being replaced by a new people of God, people who are the children of through Jesus, right? They're new, born again through Christ. And there's so many arguments and debates about this, but premills are trying to still keep the ethnicity of Israel a potent thing, which is why there are Zionists today. And then you also have the church is this little period. We're in the pause period where we're focused on the Gentiles. And when that ends, don't worry, God's going to save all Israel. So at the end, don't worry, everybody that's Jewish and whatnot, he's going to save, in different versions of this are out there. That no matter what, whether they believe in Jesus or not, some say all Israelites will be saved because that's what the text says. All Israel shall be saved. So they don't limit it. Or some say, well, what he's saying is anyone who believes in that he's going to focus on Jews again. Meaning a temple might be rebuilt, which is really scary when you have politicians who believe in this stuff, right? That might be looking over at Israel right now going, we need to rebuild that temple and take down that mosque. You're talking about war, right? So there's going to be it's really scary what religion can do. I rabbit trailed off to just say, I bumped into this theory called full preterism. Most people have never even heard of it. It is a heresy in Christendom. It is the teaching that Jesus returned in 70 AD. He didn't come back. We're not waiting for him to come back. It already happened. And I heard this guy say this and I went, you're freaking on drugs, man. Let me hit the next video. I watched him. And when he used the New Testament, I couldn't help but think to myself, if I'm going to be honest with the words of God, with the words of Christ, he meant what he said. This generation will not pass away. He's coming back. Paul thought he was coming back. In Paul's lifetime, we who remain and are alive at his coming will be transformed. Paul said this in 1 Thessalonians 4. I took it seriously, and while I was in the Presbyterian church, I became a full preterist, which meant I was starting to believe in heresy, and I was talking to other members in the Presbyterian church about this. Some of them were becoming convinced. Well, they had 5 elders bring me into a court-like situation, not for me to challenge them or to try and debate, for them to reprove me. And they wanted to correct me and told me to remain silent, stop talking about this in the church. I felt so out of place already. And I had already struggled with addiction through my life and stuff to a point where I didn't feel like I was at home anymore. So I stopped attending, and eventually they excommunicated me. They sent me a legal documentation of excommunication saying, you're not a member of the Presbyterian PCA.
Welcome to hell.
Amen. Sorry for rambling. I wanted to get it out of the way, though, so you kind of knew, like, what happened to me is reading and taking my Bible more seriously,
right,
and actually trying to be serious about the words of Jesus in the New Testament caused me to end up getting excommunicated from the church. And that is what allowed me to go into territory I would have never gone.
Yeah, it was actually, PCA was the last stop for me. So we have a similar, I mean, I never became like a full preterist or anything like that, but yeah, I was going to say, that's why I have another friend, the apostate. He has like, he's put his like the excommunication drama, like on his blog, and he's got like all these interactions, you know, he's got the names like, you know, scribbled out, but it's just hilarious. Like, you know, it's funny. Some of the ways that they enact church discipline.
Oh yeah. They used to come up to my house on a Sunday, the elders, and knock on my door. Why weren't you at church today on Sabbath? Of course, Sunday's Sabbath to them.
Right.
And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, they're coming to my door, you know?
I mean, this is a side tangent. It's so weird that like the PCA, there's so many strands of Reformed theology within the PCA. It's such a big tent that like there's the more hardline people, and there's like the Tim Keller PCA people. It's just so broad. I don't know if it's going to be able to hold. I don't know how long it's going to be able to hold, honestly.
I don't either.
I don't know how much my audience cares about this, but I just like, you know, you have similar backgrounds, so it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's interesting to me though as well, because you said your deconversion, or like the start of the questioning the Bible was central to that. I would say that for me too, like atheism and theism had nothing to do with why I left Christianity. I became an atheist like months after, like not even months, maybe like a year, 2 years afterwards. Like I went from Christianity to agnosticism immediately. Had nothing, like I remember it was kind of like, I guess I always had a sort of, again, maybe it's the bearded, I never had a beard, but you know, the bearded Reformed person in me. I always had sort of a Humean skepticism towards miracle claims. And so like there was things holding up my faith, like inerrancy, like thinking that the prophecy of Jesus pointed to the future. Religious experience was big because, you know, the ultimate way, you know, according to Westminster Confession of Faith, is that the Holy Spirit testifies in your heart, you know, that the Bible is the word of God. So that's the ultimate. So that, you know, the Reformed tradition takes that really seriously.
Yeah.
But, and I've said this before, but the more, like you said, that experience was real to you, but I started interacting with people who were like Mormons. There's like the weird Mother God cult. I don't remember. I don't know if you know what that is. I'm sure you probably
I've heard of it.
I don't remember what they're called, but just interacting with all these different people, other Christians too. And just, it became clear to me that what was motivating the confidence in their specific beliefs was, again, this sort of religious experience that seemed identical to what I was experiencing. And yet everyone's drawing different conclusions. Now, that doesn't prove that, you know, it's all wrong, but I think that's a clue that maybe this isn't a good way to know stuff.
Yeah,
if there ever was one.
That's definitely not a measure you would, and don't get me wrong, I understand, and you understand why people do it. Right. But once you see everyone has this same thing, that's where I became more of a natural, like those ideas helped me lead me toward naturalism and saying, is there a natural explanation for why we all experience these things? And that is what started to, you're right, atheism. If anything, if someone was trying to push atheism on me, I would have remained more of, this is me, right? I'd have been like afraid to go there. It was really this subtle conclusion I started to draw after all the data I kept looking into. Is Jesus really this unique healer? And, you know, when you start listening to these scholars over the past few years on my channel, I went from a guy who went from God is only through Jesus. The only way to get up to heaven, to Jesus, or to God is through Christ. No one can get to the Father except through the Son. And I thought exclusively that. And that's when God had all this power in my life. When I started to go, hold on, everyone else has these experiences. Hold on. What makes me? I actually started to question the basis of our foundation of holding on to the word of God is true. And you got to start with that. So when people say, I'm not a presuppositionalist, like I just recently had a conversation with a guy named Canadian Catholic, didn't know him from Adam. People say, don't ever do that again. But anyway, I had a conversation with him. He says, I'm not a presuppositionalist. I'm an evidentialist. Right. And I said, okay, we get into the resurrection. Tell me, what is it that convinces you? First, we need to go back, he said. Do you think it's possible there's a God? Like, I'm like, whoa, I'm talking about Jesus and the resurrection here. You want me to already go back to an ontological concept of if there's a God to begin with, and I already cast doubts on that. So why are we doing this back here? Now we're going to connect the dots all the way down to Jesus. Did he rise from the dead, and dealing with that case? Because he wants you to try and see why he is convinced. But that's not a good argument. That's what I was trying to point out. Long story short, I started to question the basis for why I thought what I did. And why don't I say Asclepius was a healing god? He came before Jesus. He had guys without eyeballs in their sockets. And when they went into his temple, the next day they came back, they had socket eyeballs. They had balls in their sockets, in their eyes, and could see. That's better than spitting in mud and rubbing in someone's eyes. So Asclepius's healing miracle of blindness is actually a better one than Jesus. Did it really happen? Why do I only grant Jesus? So I started seeing other things I never would have looked into. Greek mythology, comparative religion, looking at the Mesopotamian backdrop to Noah in Genesis. When I did that, I opened up Pandora's box and God got bigger. I said, okay, I couldn't let go of God. I said, God is in every culture. It's like the 6 wise men of Hindustan, and they're all blind, and they all went to see the elephant. The elephant is God, but it's in every single culture. And everyone's tapping into it because they're all being revealed little nuggets of the truth about God. But when that happened, God got bigger and lost his potency. So he wasn't as strong on my life. There wasn't as much strength in the way that it had control in my own life. And then I realized, what's the difference between God just being this essence, this spiritual thing, all right? It's universe. It's this fundamental metaphysical whatever, and naturalism. What's the difference? It's like saying, what's the difference between deism and atheism? God's not around anymore, okay? You're just saying he was around at one point, but he just, I'm going away. I made it and I'm gone. Okay, like what's the difference? He's not there now. So when I said that, I was like, it just became more obvious to me as I saw problems and flaws with the text that I can't take this seriously as like, this is true in God's word. And I became more critical of the Bible. Now I'm like a skeptic who takes jabs. So.
Yeah. No, it's definitely interesting because I know that I'm more concerned with undermining religious fundamentalism than I am like all approaches religion. So I've had Christians on my channel who would say, well, just because, there's errors in the Bible, blah, 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 doesn't mean that God isn't appropriating those things. Like there's this kind of view of inspiration that's very loose. But to me, you don't even have to paint it in the sense of like an error proves the Bible is not divinely inspired. All you have to do is say something like, if we can explain all of this by just appealing to human beings, what's the simpler explanation? You don't have to actually say, aha, here's a contradiction, and therefore the Bible's not the word of God. Boom. That's not, you don't have to do that. You can actually take a more kind of philosophical approach and just say, okay, you're right. Just because there's a contradiction or there's some historical mistake doesn't mean that God couldn't inspire it. But it's kind of the difference between if someone says that there's fairies causing the grass to grow, but we have an account of the grass growing without fairies. That doesn't prove that there's no fairies helping the grass grow. But I mean, I'm not comparing God to fairies, everyone. Okay, so just relax. I'm using that as an example to it's kind of the Occam's razor thing. Yeah. If I can completely account for the grass growing without appealing to the fairies, then I don't need the fairy hypothesis. In the same way, exactly. I think we could have the Bible and explain it without appealing to any kind of divine hand that would have to be involved in any way. So that's my little tirade.
There's so much to say on that. What you just said is you put that really well, and there's so much we could say about that.
Yeah. So so you went to the kind of, you expanded your version of Christianity to where everything, and then you eventually deconverted completely. How did that affect your family? Like because your family has been with, all these changes that you've probably had. So how did that happen for you?
I was the extreme man of faith in the family. Everyone, my mom, my dad, my brother, my wife, my kids, they all knew that Derek's there was crazy times I'd go to the church. For example, we went to this church called Covenant Love. We're in the audience. Now it's more of a non-denominational charismatic type of church, but it's full of people. There's like 800 people that go in there, maybe 500 to 800 in an actual Sunday service. And there's been times where this strange thing would happen and everyone would have like the moment where the pastor would get all up there. Someone in here's going through it, or someone in here God has put it on my heart that someone in here has a great calling. And the guy pointed at me and like brought me up on stage, the whole nine. I'm talking like, God has told me he chose you, like all this stuff. Right. And my whole family is like, whoa, you know, and I was so devout, serious about this. Like I woke up and went to sleep wanting to talk about it and read about this and stuff. So I think they got enough just from my overload of this material and being so extreme that they never took it that serious as I did.
Right.
It was too much that I already did. They probably were kind of turned off by the extreme level I took this. So when I deconverted, my wife was actually kind of relieved. She's like, and we had this talk on the way to the beach one day. I'm driving and I go, hey, babe, after I've been studying, you know, the Bible was written by men and there's some mistakes in there. She goes, well, I told you that 10 years ago that I don't trust. She said, I don't trust men. This is what she said. I don't trust men. She always had that natural, just don't trust humans. I mean, she's been done wrong her whole life as a child. She has no reason to trust humans like that. She's very cautious about who she trusts. She goes, I told you, men wrote it. Like, it's going to have human error. It's going to have problems. And I said, wow, you did say that. But now I know that. I can prove that. You know, I could show that. And we started having better conversations because we actually saw eye to eye. She was not very religious. My mom, on the other hand, worries the hell out of me going to hell. She is always like, can you say a prayer real quick? Just she's superstitious in that sense. So she's like, will you just say a prayer right now? And I can hear you say and ask God, like, if you're wrong, to please forgive you. And I'm like, no problem. I'll do that for my mom. I don't like, it makes her feel good. And I say it, I'll pray, God, if I'm wrong and you made me and you know all things, right? If my understanding of you is true, forgive me. I'm just using the brain that you made and I'm doing the damn best I can to try and understand these things using logic and the things that I've been given to understand. And then mom's like, oh, I feel so much better. You know, I don't cuss in the prayer, but the point is, could you imagine? Mom feels better when I do that. Dad never gave a shit.
That's interesting though, because I feel like that, you know, that you have this empathy because you were raised this way. I feel like there's a lot of people who are raised atheists, or not raised, but they've been atheists for their whole lives. They don't understand. They're just like, oh, you know, fuck religion and all this kind of. It's like you don't understand the grip that this can have on people's lives and how much pain something like you just walking away can cause someone like your mom. Like you're not gonna. People would say, you know, well, if I was in that situation, I'd tell her to fuck off. Like, no, you wouldn't. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. I think there's some. You got to walk the tightrope when it comes to, you know, criticizing ideas, but also realizing that people are, you know, people like us who have been there. There's a real thing that's keeping people there. It's not completely like malevolent, like on the part of the people believing it.
No,
even if it's crazy. Like it's.
You're right. 99% of them aren't being malevolent. They're really convinced. It's like an addiction. I said that before. All right. You know how many people judge addicts? Look at that guy on the side of the road who literally, you know, is hooked on meth or hooked on heroin. You see him nodding out. The guy that everyone's laughing at the gas station that's behind there on the camera that goes viral. Those videos where they're tapping on the window, hey, let me get a pack of smokes. And he's like, and he's nodding and you're laughing at him. You're laughing at him. Ha ha, look how stupid he looks. And in some sense, it's sometimes funny looking, right? You're like, oh, that's funny looking. But if you knew the shit that man was going through, if you understood, if you had understanding of what that man is going through behind there, and if that was your brother, if that was your son, if that was your father, you wouldn't laugh. And I know that I'm making it serious, but I want it to be because the man is not a bad person. I know this from experience. I did horrible things for my addiction, stole, lied. I mean, like really took lots of stuff. I ended up getting a criminal charge because of addiction. And I know as soon as I got clean and drugs were out of my system and I wasn't chasing a drug, I've had compliments and comments from people who've said, you're one of the most stand-up guys I've ever met, right? I'm not going to judge myself like, oh, I know that. That would be very like egotistical of me to assume I'm this. But most people will say like, I didn't expect that from you. You know, you're one of the better people I've ever known. These people are sincere, most of them. And they really believe it. But there's something psychological in the brain that causes that. And I know because I was sincere as a Christian. I know many Christians who are sincere. There's something there, and I don't know exactly what that is, but they don't mean bad. They don't. But sometimes when there's argument, and I get this from Christian apologists today, when they get upset they'll use it as a weapon sometimes. You know what? Don't worry, when you'll meet God face to face. And it's like, would you say that to your own brother? Would you say that to your son? Like, are you gonna, maybe you would. R.C. Sproul did a sermon that was on Pine Creek's show recently. He was talking about how, you know, look at your own mother burning in hell and you'll be glad. What?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, going back a little bit, though, I thought it was funny how you said your wife was relieved. I think now my wife is relieved because I was kind of, I mean, at first it caused a lot of tension, but it was interesting because, you know, how the Reformed tradition places a lot of emphasis on like family devotions and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, she'd be like doing the dishes and like, it's time for family devotions. And I'd like open the Bible and start reading the chapter from the Bible. And she's like, I could just feel the eye roll. You know what I mean? Like, not all the time. Like, sometimes she was into it, but I was just so like, we got to get this done. You know, check this out. Not that it was always, you know, got a checklist mentality, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I took that role. I was very serious as well. So again, what you were saying, being serious about it, I tried to be as well. And at first, you know, when I first started deconverting, it was horrible because she was worried about me going to hell and all this kinds of stuff. But after the initial, I guess, several months, yeah, I think she's actually, I feel like I've said this before. I feel like now that she's kind of walked away from Christianity, like she's flourishing more than I am. Not that I'm not flourishing, but like I feel like it's helped her.
Good.
Just because, you know, getting out of kind of the repressive Reformed view of women and all this other stuff that can kind of be toxic within that. I'm not saying all Christianity is the same, but just within that specific tradition, you know, getting out of that, you know, anyway. I don't know,
extremely patriarchal. No, that's a great point. Did your church wear head coverings? Were they that kind of? Ours were like I feel like the PCA Reformed Church I was part of was kind of out of the vein of Puritanism. We used to study some of the guys who were Puritans, like actually listen to them and stuff. We did have a piano. We wouldn't play any other instruments. And of course, everything was from the hymnal. But the women wore like there were 3 or 4 women. You didn't have to, but like women in the church were wearing head coverings and stuff.
Well, there were some, there's a couple that did in ours. I mean, it wasn't required, but a couple did in ours too. But it wasn't a strict with the music and stuff. Like, you went through a really hard line PCA one, it sounds like. But yes, there were. I mean, our church, I guess it would be 300 or so. So yes, there's, you know, for that big of a group in a Reformed, you know, kind of gathering, there's going to be some people probably that engage in that. But yeah. So one of the things I wanted you've talked about the drug use, and I think I remember hearing you say that becoming not religious actually helped you stay off of drugs. Like, and it sounds so counterintuitive to people because their experience is something like they found something greater than themselves that helped them get off. But I think that from hearing your testimony and also from my own life, there was a period where I put on more weight, and like after I, you know, kind of started deconverting and time went on and I kind of settled, like, you know, I'd lost, you know, like that's not the same thing, but I'm just saying, I think that there is something to be said for people just assume that God belief or these religious ideas are keeping them on the path. You know what I mean? When in reality, I think that there's more to be said about how actually leaving that can actually make you live better in different ways. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
I guess a brief comment I'd like to make is I found myself, like I've learned to connect with me and not, it's like Santa Claus on December 25th for your kids. You always buy them the gift, right? And they end up getting surprised and they thank Santa Claus for all the things that Santa Claus brought them. When they finally find out it was their parents, all that gratitude and thankfulness to their parents that has been given to a fictional mythical being that supposedly had all this power, the real power was your parent the whole time. The one who loved you was truly your parent. The human in your life is what I cherish now, rather than the mythical mindset of some abstract metaphysical being. So now, instead of in the clouds in my mind and thinking of a God looking down at me when I would go and watch pornography and feel shame and guilt for this, I'm now looking to my wife and to my mother and to my father and my kids. I see the world around me and I'm not looking past it, thinking of the world to come. I dwell now. And when I found myself, I always say that this sounds kind of like a esoteric thing, but take it how you will. I fell in love with me for me. I didn't need the God idea. I didn't need this abstract being. I had loved ones around me who supported me the whole time. Even when I was hardcore thinking God was the reason. Oh, let's thank God for that. Well, your mom's the one who gave you that money. Yeah, but thank God mom gave me that money. Well, thank mom for mom giving you that money. Why? You know, so I didn't need God. That's the thing, is I didn't need it. And I had such a hardcore view reading the Bible about how God viewed sin and my life. I couldn't live that perfect life. So Christians will go, oh, you just wanted permission to sin. Well, when you take it serious enough and you realize what sin is and biblically look at that, if you think that guys like Paul Washer, who have the hell damnation sermons, aren't having these same sins, look how guilty he talks in his sermons. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine the shame if he's really living I'm not saying he is, a Ravi Zacharias lifestyle that we don't even know about? And that kind of sermon in his own mind, psychologically, imagine if he knows he is going to be the very man he's preaching against. That is so abusive, so bad. I stopped feeling guilt for those things because I realize they're natural. I look at my dog humping another dog and go, hold on, what are you doing? You're supposed to be with that dog. Like I don't, like the dog's not going to hell. And I realize that we're all part of this same earth, from the same family. We're all part of the same thing. So I started going in the natural route, and it made better sense than the superstitious God made a woman from a rib, and a snake talked, and an ass talked to Balaam, and, you know, the river splits, and, you know, all the mythical stuff made better sense.
So you're saying you love Christianity because you just wanted to sin. That's what you're saying.
I'm glad you figured it out.
Yeah, no, I just have to have a little fun.
I'm teasing back too. No, but you're right. A lot of Christians do try to say that, because my life, I must admit, if it weren't for addiction, if it weren't for the struggle of addiction, I would never have had the balls, to be honest, to actually question my faith. I would never have said, this isn't working for me. Why is I'm supposed to have the Holy Spirit of God, and I could do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If the Spirit of God dwells in me, and I believed it did, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I keep relapsing? The pastor keeps telling me, no, you don't have a real illness. This is a spiritual matter. This is a sin matter. This is a moral matter, not some scientific matter as to why you have addiction. And when I found out it's a scientific matter that is causing me to live a certain lifestyle, and to, you know, if you're hungry and starving, you will still to try and eat if you can. Are you morally wrong for trying to take that apple if you're actually starving? Well, sure, stealing's wrong, period. If you take it, it's wrong. Will you do it? Would you cut someone's hand off because they're starving for an apple? So there's this moral dilemma that they were pushing on me about my addiction. And I found out there's much more to that. It's more complex. It has nothing to do with the spiritual. That's not the reason I was doing these things. But I thought I wasn't God's child. Over and over, I kept questioning, why is my life not matching up with this perfect holiness life that isn't, I'm not living this perfect Holy Spirit life that's supposed to empower me to not do these things, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like a circular like rationalization. So the more you fail, it's like, well, it's me. But if you succeed, it's God. And so there's almost no way, unless you finally just like, what if this whole thing is bullshit? Like, well, I mean, I'm not saying, again, I try to taper back for some of the liberal Christians watching, but I mean, in general, so a lot of again, within certain strands of Christianity, and I would say it seems like the New Testament authors emphasize the transformative power of the Holy Spirit. And so if someone, if you seem like from your inner psychology, seem very devout, and you're like very much trying, and it doesn't seem like you're getting the results that you should be getting, there's one option is that just, there's something's wrong with you. And then you can keep going through that cycle over and over. Something's wrong with you ultimately. Or maybe you can actually question, like, maybe the Holy Spirit's not real. Like, right. Maybe I'm locked in a circle to where when I succeed, it's God. And when I fail, it's me, blah, blah, blah. Nothing can break me out until you actually just question and like step out of the circle for a second. Just put your personal beliefs on the shelf and just ask the question. Maybe this supernatural story that I'm telling myself is just wrong.
And that is exactly the point of why my deconversion was slow. It went from God as tight and it's Jesus to God is in everything. This abstract idea in all culture, all humanity, everyone is experiencing it, blah, 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 which is kind of hinted at. Paul talks about this when he's quoting Epimenides in Acts 17, the Greek poet about Zeus, when he says, we are all God's offspring and in him we move, we breathe, we have our being. But when I started to do that and then realized what's the difference, I didn't need drugs anymore. In fact, when I let go of those thoughts and constantly trying to check myself and get right, stay right. Why are you messing up? Get right on the right path. You know, all that stuff. When I stopped all of that, the obsession for drugs, the idea that I needed to live that lifestyle, or I was making mistakes, all of that kind of stopped having power over me. It's like, hey, make sure you don't eat that cookie over in that jar with the chocolate chip in it that's melted hot. What the hell? I kind of want to eat that cookie. Like, I kind of like, now I know the cookie's there. I want to, you're thinking about the cookie, you're resisting the cookie. The cookie's, I really am hungry. I want a cookie. When you don't even think within the jar of the cookie, or you're not even in the kitchen anymore, I think I'll have a cookie. No biggie. And when I have one, I don't feel guilt, because no one's telling me you can and cannot have a cookie. I'm going to enjoy and go with what feels right. And I let that determine, you know, my life path. And I don't need drugs. I don't need to do these things like I once did. I feel like it doesn't have power over me anymore. So if anything, I now have the Holy Spirit as an atheist. And, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
No, but it's interesting too, because there's the different approaches. Like, I don't know, I keep going back to Reformed theology just because we're, both somewhat in that.
Feel free, brother.
So, but it's interesting though, like there's different, even within Reformed theology, there's the more navel-gazing Puritan approach towards sin. And then there's like, I don't know if you read anything like by Michael Horton and like some of the people like Westminster Seminary. And anyway, so like there's the more just or Tim Keller, rest in the finished work of Christ. That's how you defeat sin. So like there's this very non-active, like just believe the gospel kind of thing, rather than just the warfare kind of John Piper. So like there's still multiple approaches, but at the same time, the same criticism can work of both, where you're just like, it's still a circle that you're trapped yourself in. But yeah. So why amongst all of this stuff, what was the inspiration behind starting this channel, the channel that you're doing now? Like what inspired you to start doing that in the first place?
You're going to laugh at me. The initial reason I wanted to start the channel, I was into I was into the woo-woo a little. Like I thought, okay, God's bigger than Christianity. So I wanted to make a channel about that. So I wanted to talk about one of the things that happened to me, just so you know the inspiration behind it, is while I was still a Christian, I was a preterist. I got excommunicated, but I was still interested in the Bible. I watched that movie Zeitgeist. I don't know if you ever saw it, the one where it's comparative of Jesus. There's a lot of not accurate information in there, but there's also some things that do kind of paint a picture. They overemphasize parallelisms between Jesus and other gods and things like that. So a lot of Christians jump on like, oh, that's not factual. There's that parallel is not there. And they're right. But I needed something to make Jesus on the same playing field as these other gods. I needed to see that, what makes Jesus better than Horus or Osiris or Dionysus or other gods. Like, and there are differences, don't get me wrong, but I needed that. This gentleman reached out to me and he was an atheist. I didn't know. We were on the phone. He said, look, I said, honestly, feels like you're an atheist. Can you just tell me? I was afraid. And I literally had to ask him, are you an atheist? Before we even continue talking. I'm not going to lie to you, D. I'm not trying to make you an atheist or anything, but yes, I am. I just want to share with you some stuff. So he started talking about Hercules, and he was comparing Hercules to Jesus, but also Hercules to like Samson, the strongest figure in the Bible, showing like, okay, there's something here. And he was explaining that there seems to be an astrotheology behind a lot of these old myths. Like, for example, remember the story with Elijah being mocked by the 42 kids that he's bald and the two bears come out? Well, if you take that literal, it's absurd and ridiculous, right? To say that these two bears killed 42 children for saying, you're bald, you're bald. Like, that's dumb. But if you know anything about astrology, you would know that, some of the zodiacal system and astrology, there's two signs in the sky, Ursa Minor and Ursa Major, and they're both bears. And 42 is a sacred number within like Hebraic thought and in the ancient world. It may have a lunar significance, not really sure, but you kind of go, is this like saying something else than the face value story? So I started looking at astrotheology. Is Esau, he's hairy, and Jacob's smooth-skinned, and Jacob's like he's kind of a smooth. Is he the moon? Is Esau the sun? Notice Esau has red hair. So I started looking and going, is there a decoding here? Is this message trying to hide behind it? It's about the sun, moon, and the stars. And it's really this celestial story. And that's what I started looking into. So I wanted to do more on that. And as I did some of these things, still believing there's a God and my experience of feeling God inside, I still feel things. I still have experiences today, but I'm an atheist. Started off there. Then I met Dr. Robert M. Price. I did not like him a long time ago. I watched him debate William Lane Craig, my hero. And I was like, you better watch your tone with William Lane Craig there, Dr. Price. Like, that's how I felt about William, the Christian apologist. And I'd skip the atheist. Finally listened to that debate with him again and listened to Dr. Price and what he says to William Lane Craig and said, could he be right? I didn't know if he was right. I actually asked a sincere, honest question deep down. Could he be right? Mm-hmm. And honestly wanted to seek out the answer to that question. And that's what led me down. I mean, I opened up Pandora's box and started to go, okay, we've got to look into the Bible with new lens.
I didn't realize that. I didn't know where you were when you first started, because I've more recently, I guess in the past maybe 3 to 6 months, kind of started watching your stuff. So I didn't know, like, at the very beginning that, you're still religious and kind of what you'd call, like, what you've said is wooey kind of religious. Yeah. I didn't know that that's where you started the channel, but that's interesting to know. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I don't know who you had on, but I think you're talking to someone and talking about how you can kind of go overboard with the comparisons between these myths and like these figures. I don't know if it was I don't think it was Ehrman. Maybe it was anyway. But so yeah, I think, are you still, so as far as I understand it, I don't think you're a mythicist anymore, are you?
I'm not a mythicist. I lean historicist.
Right.
That doesn't mean mythicists couldn't be right. I mean, obviously in my mind, now everyone has positions, so I'm not like trying to rule out anything. I'm actually going to take a course next month with Richard Carrier again to uncover, open up the question again, re-examine how he looks at this data and why he concludes he thinks it's more likely Jesus is fictional. Now, if you asked me, are you a mythicist on the miraculous Jesus? Yes. Just like I'm a mythicist of Santa Claus. Okay. Was there a Saint Nick in history that was mythologized and you added all the myth of Santa onto? Potentially, yes. Okay, so I'm saying I'm a mythicist of a guy walking on water. I'm a mythicist of a guy actually literally rising from the dead or resurrecting the dead or anything else that you can kind of imagine with that. I don't think that's true. I don't think that actually happened. But was there a guy at the bottom of the barrel? I think there probably was. And he was mythologized, especially when you start taking this thing to the Greeks, to the Romans. When you start taking this thing over, how are you going to sell this? Oh, well, there's a Messianic Jew down here who has a Dead Sea Scroll Essene type message for you. No. How about we paint him with Dionysus, but make him better? How about we make him better than the Greco-Roman gods and more merciful? Instead of punishing his enemies, he shows them mercy, like Julius Caesar or something. Like there's so many potential avenues to explore on this. And so that's what I think happened. I think he probably was mythologized, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think that's interesting though. I've never really sort of dug deep into mythicism, but I think I watched the Holy Kool-Aid video that he did about recently as well. And I think he did a good job basically saying like the historical bar for someone existing is low. I mean, it should be low. I mean, so the kind of testimony, the kind of testimony we have for Jesus, whether or not you want to say it's, reliable enough to say that he walked on water, that's one question. But it's really not that complicated to just, have certain kind of writings and then just deduce from that okay, someone probably existed that they're basing this on. It's just seemed, and plus, I don't think academic consensus like proves something, obviously, but I think that if someone's not a specialist in a certain area, then a general default to that, like a prima facie default to that upon looking into things is healthy. But again, it doesn't prove anything. I'm not saying that. But so yeah, I've never really like dug into the mythicist literature or anything like that. But yeah, I thought he did a good job just explaining why the bar seems to be low for why you would just, it seems kind of like you'd have to, again, make a very elaborate story as to why, rather than just accepting the straightforward thing that someone, added some stuff to a real guy, then there was no guy there in the first place. You know what I mean?
It really depends on your approach.
Right.
So it's a good question to ask. I don't take it like Ehrman. Ehrman's anti-mythicist. Like he thinks it's ridiculous. And I'm not convinced that it's ridiculous, even though I lean there was probably a guy. Paul is, he has explanations. Why is a lot of Jesus' life lacking in Paul? Why doesn't he talk about Jesus's miraculous healings and his life Well, that wasn't his concern, is what the historians will say. He wasn't concerned with any of that. He was only concerned about his message of death, burial, resurrection. That's mainly it, in the power of Christ on the coming apocalypse that's coming, that the end is about to happen, and that's it. And that's possible. Like, everyone has a possible explanation. But when you look at Philippians, for example, mythicists have a leg to stand on in a lot of ways by saying he was this figure, a heavenly figure, who came down from heaven, taking on flesh to come into the world, and then went back after he had, taken the penalty of sin and whatnot. Weird stuff that if he's writing this a decade or two after the actual guy died, it developed so fast that mythicists say, no, out the gate, the earliest data we have is Paul, and Paul already has a celestial Christ figure. He's getting personal revelations from him. You don't want to rule out the possibility, is all I'm saying. And I think that Ehrman has his reasons why he does. I personally don't rule out the possibility, even though I think it's more probable there was a guy that was just mythologized and all of that material was added to him. It's just as possible, though, this guy was euhemerized. And I don't know that. I'm just saying it's possible.
I think there's something to be said, and I have to look in more into it. I want to have Matthew Hartke back on my channel, but so cognitive dissonance theory, when you think of like how prophecy, when groups have a prophecy and it fails, they rationalize it afterwards. Yeah. So I think that we can document, we can show that happens like in real time. So I think that can be potentially very explanatorily powerful to explain what happened in early Christianity. And so again, so that could explain why stuff happened so fast. I mean, that's one way to look at it, instead of just saying, well, maybe it was made up. Maybe it was just that there was something with the cognitive dissonance going on when it comes to failed expectations. Well, we thought he was going to, be this, and he didn't. He died, and then something took off from there. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of stuff. I don't want to touch on everything there, but there's a lot of stuff to consider.
Great points, though, by the way.
Yeah. So who has been your favorite guest, if you had to pick one?
Favorite guest?
Yeah, that you've interviewed. Because like I said at the beginning, you've interviewed a lot of top-notch scholars. So
yeah, that's a tough question. I can't believe you just asked me that. That was
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, can I give a top 3?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Dr. Robert M. Price, obviously, for biblical reasons, just his vast knowledge, not just biblical. He knows Islam, he knows Buddhism, he knows just ridiculous. He's like an encyclopedia on information of mythology. So when it comes to this, man, if I ask him a question, he's heard of something that no one else talks about in academia. For example, if I can give one example, then I'll get to the other guys. I asked the question about like Noah's son Ham, who was cursed. Now, there's people who run around saying ridiculous things like black people are cursed because of Ham and Ham's their father, some stupid stuff, right? Racist tendencies come out of these kind of stupid teachings. But I asked Dr. Price, like, what was the curse of Ham? What did he do? Well, it says he saw his father's nakedness or something like that. And there's other explanations. Like he actually saw his father in a tent naked while he was drunk, and it was embarrassing, and he just talked bad about his dad. So he cursed him forever and his seed. I don't know. I don't know about that. Then there's another one. Well, he slept with his mom. It has an incest curse. So he actually slept with his own mom, and Noah cursed Ham for that. Possible. There's another explanation that I never really heard, that Dr. Price knows about these things and says Ham, according to the myth, castrated his father Noah. And this is where he saw his father's nakedness. And there's another myth in these other Greco-Roman and other mythologies where the god is castrated. And so there's this patriarchal thing where some of these patriarchs are named after some deities or have deity-like similarities. And the stories kind of overlap. Dr. Price is into that. So Dr. Bob is my number one. Like, I love him to death, which is why I've done so many videos with him. He just has a lot of knowledge, and he doesn't tell you how you must think. He lets you like, could be this, could be that, could be that, could be wrong. And you're like, tell me the answer. You want the scholar to say what you need to know. This is what it is. That's not him. He wants you to have the tools to think for yourself. But he also wants to let you know, these are some of the stories that are out there. Consider them. Number 2, Dr. Joshua Bowen. Mm-hmm. Dr. Joshua Bowen is one of the most patient, kind, loving. He acts better. He's one of the best Christians I've ever met. Yeah. But what I mean is he's just that kind of person. Him and his wife are like the most open-armed, kind people I've ever known. Now, number 3, that's a toughie, man. Who could I even, scholar wise, who have I interviewed that would be on the third list? I got to throw one out there, man.
You can do 2. It's fine.
Okay, 2's good. Okay.
Okay.
I don't want to, because then I'm going to have someone contact me. Why wasn't I on the list?
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I've interviewed Dr. Josh twice. So he was one of the first interviews that I've had on my channel, and I interviewed him recently after his book. But yeah, he's a good guy. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he is.
So where's this headed? All of this MythVision podcast, where's it going? So what's your big picture goal? Because it seems like now you're doing in-person interviews. So you're flying or driving out to wherever to like get interviews with the scholars and stuff. So it obviously seems that you're expanding your effort. So what is the end goal with this? Like where do you hope to see yourself in 5? The stereotypical question. Where do you want to be in 5 years? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, one of the things I would like to see is I'm going to use this for like common folk, right? For the common folk, boring stuff become not boring. And what I mean by that is scholarship to most people is boring. People don't want to sit, not most people aren't interested in sitting through a Yale course online, listening to Christine Hayes give a presentation on the development of the documentary hypothesis or Yahweh or whatever. Most people, guys like me, absolutely get my fix from stuff like that, but I want to package it for a contemporary audience in a way that it's like, you guys are getting what you're going to learn at Yale, what you would learn at some of these major colleges here on MythVision. It's educational, but also it deals with some of the current issues that I think more people should realize with all of these religions. I want to see more people realize you don't have to have religion or faith in any God to live a life and to enjoy the life you have here on earth. You don't need to. I want to show that. And that is something that I'm interested in presenting to people. So yeah, that's one of my hopes, and maybe down the road more can come of this, but I want to deal with cults as well.
Yeah, for my own, goals, I definitely want to. My stated goal is to undermine religious fundamentalism, because I don't. If there's people that I know that are religious and whatever, and that doesn't really bother me until they start doing certain behaviors, or like if they're religious in certain ways and they're just helping the poor. Yeah, I don't care. Believe whatever you want, as long as you're not kind of reaching in these certain areas. But the other thing too was I kind of want my channel to be what I want to see atheist content be on YouTube, in a sense, because I know that like I really like what you're doing with all the interviews. So obviously I'm doing interviews as well. That's like not even quite half of my content. But when it comes to like the shorter videos, I see a lot of atheist content where it's very it's like funny, like slapstick, and it's not really sophisticated. So where it's like just open season for theists to be like, "Hi, you made this mistake, or whatever." With my short videos, I want to be like philosophically and biblically informed, but still kind of come in to that venue with these short videos. And sometimes I do response videos, sometimes I do other ones, but popularize, again, like you're saying, I want to popularize some of this more academic stuff, but in a way where you're still packaging it in a way that people still consume content, like on YouTube. Yeah, so that's kind of, it's kind of born of my own frustration, kind of watching some of atheist YouTube, and like, this could have been so much better if you just knew more about the Bible, bro. Like, you just made so many mistakes there that I could have done this much better. So that's kind of like that kind of frustration kind of welled up within me, and I was like, well, why don't I just do it? Like, I'm not saying trying to be a narcissist, but I mean, like, I have a background. I feel like I'm conversant within philosophy and Bible stuff just based on my background. So I want to make popular level videos that people can watch, and there's less holes to poke in. You're doing a fantastic job, bro. Like, to the to the dismay of the theists out there, I want to, kind of do that. But yeah, I respect what you say there, because it may come across that I'm anti people who believe in God or are believers in faith and have religious whatever it might be. And you're right. My #1 mission is destroy, not just undermine, fundamentalism. I want to show you how silly and how harmful these ideologies are, because if someone is actually a fundamentalist, that means they're serious. Usually. Okay. That means that they're like me. And if I empathize, which I should, because I can't, who the hell am I to judge and point the finger at you when I was exactly where you are? And I wouldn't have listened to me 8 or 9 years ago. I would look at me and go, you don't know what you're talking about. I would tell myself that. I know that for a fact. So I'm with you. I have friends that I interview. Ian Mills, for example, he is a Christian. Right. But he's not the kind of Christian that I want to even challenge. I don't even want to challenge his faith.
I've interviewed him off air. I've asked him some questions and he's like, that's my own personal choice. That's it. I'm like, I respect it. I said, dude, I love you, man. I said, thank you so much. Like, he's pointing out issues though. He'll like, well, you know, definitely there's a contradiction here. And I'm like, Christians, are you listening to this guy? You know, like, wake up. You know, there's something going on here. But
right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. One of the other questions I had was, so you said you wouldn't listen to your past self. I've often thought about, like, what would you say to your past self if you had a chance? Like, I've thought about that for myself, and I don't really know if like, part of me would want to be mean. but I don't know what, like, have you thought about that before? Like, if you could sit down with you at the peak of your religiosity, what would you say now to yourself?
That is an extremely deep question. If I actually saw and I knew that I was talking to me, it might freak the hell out of me. Like, I can't believe that's where I'll be in 9-10 years. You know what I mean? I can't believe that. But if I had the conversation, I was able to have a sit down 10-minute conversation, I would start with, first of all, Derek, everything's going to be okay. Okay. You're going to be all right. But let me tell you some things. You really should take me to heart here. And if I knew this was me, I would try to take it serious. I suspect even breaking through my fundamentalism, I'd be scared out of my mind though, because I was afraid. That's why the deconversion was slow. I was afraid of hell. I was afraid that I was talking to God that whole time, you know, like what's going to happen to me and things like that. But I would probably tell myself, keep going, keep searching, and don't stop here. That's all. I would encourage myself to keep going, because you're going to end up out of this thing you think you're in right now. I know it's scary, but don't. Believe in yourself. You know, like, I would coach myself. It would be more of a psychological coaching, because I couldn't get me from there to there just from one conversation. it's a long, drawn out process that's required.
Right. No, I totally agree. It's just, you know, my weaker moments, I just want to go back and be like, you dumbass. Like, you know what I mean? But yeah, so we've been going for a little over an hour. I know you said you had about an hour of spare time. So
hey, I'm game for you, man. If you need me for a little longer, I'm here.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. I got through a lot of what I wanted to get through. So I guess we can end on something more light. What are your hobbies other than this?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, now, you know, my hobbies change. That's one thing I never knew was who I was. I always went from one thing, hardcore rocker, Mudvayne, Slipknot, heavy metal, to hip hop, then skateboarder, to BMX biking, to a jock who played sports and ran triathlons, to here I am smoking dope and shooting up drugs. Like, I never knew who I was, right? So this is just something I've kind of figured out who I am now. Right now, my hobby is spoiling my kids, and I'm not taking the rod to them anymore. And like, I love to play video games with them. I love taking their mom and them out to go get something to eat and sit down at the table. Like, family is more important now than it ever was in the faith. It's so amazing. Like, so that, and I love reading. I love to read. I also love to go, and one of my hobbies too, because I do YouTube, this is what I do full time for my family so that I can provide and everything, is this podcast. This is everything I do right here. I like to go and support other channels. I'll watch their content sometimes. I don't live on YouTube, but I'll go and like, I'll watch every once in a while and try to go give them a thumbs up and encouragement in the chat, because I think more of that is needed. As far as when it comes to like actually doing things though, I haven't had time to go do other things like let's go bowling or let's go do this or go do that. I like to do those things, but I've been working on my house for months now, because when COVID hit, my whole family, we had 11 people living in a 3-bedroom house.
Wow.
Rental houses weren't open. People's credit wasn't good enough. It was a hell of a nightmare. Like, and finally we got it to where we have our house back. Our kids have their own rooms. So I love spending time with the kids. That's my favorite hobby of all, is my babies.
I think that's a good place to end. So do you want to plug anything? Well, you basically explained. Do you want to plug anything before we go off?
First thing, I'd like to ask anyone who's watching this to please support what you do. I've been watching your channel for, I'd say, about 3-4 months. I've seen some of your shorter clips. I've seen some of your longer interviews. Graham Oppie. You know, I've watched you for a minute, man, and I think you and me have so much in common. Just our wonder and awe for this information. We love this. So I would like to ask anyone who's watching just to support him. You know, you can give me thumbs up, come subscribe, you know, support what I'm doing. If you're interested in getting my content early, I do have a Patreon, like hundreds of videos that have not been released to the public. If you want to ask a question of a scholar, I take Patreon questions. So if you support me on Patreon, you could send me a question. I'll ask the scholar. That's a way to support me. But I really ask, if you're watching this, to help subscribe to his channel, so, like his content, and support him in any way, because he has a similar mission to me in many ways. And I really am a fan of what you do. So,
wow, I appreciate that. But I'll definitely put links in the description to your content as well. So,
well, yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah, you didn't have to. But either way, dude, we have the same. We want to educate people and have fun doing it. So,
yep. All right, I'm going to end the broadcast now. We can talk a little bit afterwards. But thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.